wanted to highlight that this is the largest charter school fraud in California history. So in response of the A3 fraud case, the San Diego Superior Court Judge Robert C. Longstreth signed a court order on September 21st, 2023, granting a motion to approve the formation of the Multi-Agency Charter School Audits Task Force, also known as the Task Force. I was designated as chair of this task force, and when we're talking about fraud, especially fraud on this scale, first and foremost, it impacts our students and our communities that rely on our children receiving a quality education. So that is the seriousness of why we're here. And in addition to the impact to our students and the surrounding communities, it also calls into question the trust and reputation of several different other professions. Charter school sector, the authorizers that approve and oversee charter schools, and state agencies with oversight responsibilities, as well as the certified public accountant profession. So that said, our report, it includes 20 recommendations to detect and curtail charter school fraud. Now, I was surprised to learn that although the charter schools got us to this work, that brought us to this table, actually the majority of the recommendations apply to all public schools. So there is an added benefit to everyone that I want to just acknowledge. Our recommendations are organized into 4 key categories: certified public accountants, authorization, qualification, training, evaluation, and also K through 12 audit guide compliance. The second pillar is a certified public accountant rotation and late audit report. The third pillar being K through 12 audit guide recommendations, and the fourth pillar, audit report disclosure recommendations. After this press conference, we have a press release that will be issued that will include a link to the final report. Once we release the report, we will begin our work on the next steps in implementing the task force recommendations. As you can imagine, that will be an awesome task to implement 20 recommendations. This accomplishment and the next actions that we take will help ensure the accountability, the transparency, and the significant investment to protect them. It will help ensure that the accountability and transparency of the significant investment that the state of California makes in its education to our children, that these assets are protected. Our recommendations in our report specifically focus on 1,300 charter schools. However, as I previously stated, the majority of the recommendations will apply to California's entire diverse public school system, which is responsible for the education of more than 6 million children and young adults in more than 10,000 schools with more than 300,000 teachers. So not only is the amount of money that was stolen significant, but the impacted communities are just as significant. So with the education of our children at stake and the significant state investment of tax money in education, it is critical that all schools be held to the highest level of integrity, accountability, fiscal compliance, and transparency. By doing so, we ensure that the students receive the educational resources and opportunities that were intended for them, so that we can support them to become successful people. So together, with the intent of the court's objective in mind, and my constitutional authority, the Superintendent of Fiscal Affairs, we will make the necessary changes to mitigate such fraud from happening in the future. So once again, I thank you for your time. It's now my great pleasure to introduce you our very own superhero, coming all the way from San Diego County. We have the San Diego District Attorney, Ms. Summer Steffens. Thank you.
Hello everybody, I'm Summer Steffens, San Diego County's District Attorney, and it is my honor to be here with the State Controller, Malia Cohen. I'm just very proud of this effort. The fact that the judge issued an order, there was not a clear deadline, but the State Controller and her team took it upon themselves to make sure that the task force comes together and has common sense, clear recommendations that can help our entire region and essentially also be a model for the nation. Because these systems are subject to fraud. Unfortunately, the most honorable professions like education are subject also to fraud. And as was stated, this was the largest educational fraud case in the state and likely the nation at the tune of $400 million, which would have continued and continued but for being detected by the San Diego District Attorney's Office, my office, and our public corruption unit led by Leon Shore and David Iorillo, an investigator and a DA, coming together to serve hundreds of warrants to uncover this massive fraud. This fraud case with the 11 defendants, 235 indictments that were issued, page indictment, convictions, and a resolution that was unusual in that with the help of our incredible receiver, Mr. Ayers, and the attorneys involved, we were able to recover almost $275 million to bring that amount back to our system of education for its intended purpose of supporting our students, our parents, and our teachers that work so hard and deserve to have every penny of the resources allotted spent on the future of our nation, which is our kids. But that wasn't enough. This success that resulted from this case, being able to bring accountability to 11 defendants, bring down their empire that was bilking our system and had planned on continuing to bilk our system. We really needed to look behind the curtain to see how can this be stopped from happening in the future. How did it take place, and what are the systems that can be put in place to make this not happen again for our communities? And thus this task force and this order by the judge were very, very important. And I'm gonna give you just a couple of examples of the work of the task force to kind of put it in action for you to see how the task force recommendations will plug these holes for the future of our kids and our educational system. Under the leadership of our state controller, the judge had put her in charge of the task force. Makes perfect sense because she's responsible for the fiscal responsibility, has a lot of power in this regard. But the task force couldn't have worked without the work of everybody here, including our receiver, Mr. Ayers, and also the partnership by the leaders in the charter school and the leaders in our educational systems. Because again, let's not forget that the overwhelming number of our charter schools and our schools are functioning with integrity. They are there to serve our kids. But like in every profession, there are bad apples that come in, and we have to make sure those bad apples rot and that they don't get to infect another basket. So as an example, we took from our case lessons, and this was really perfect because you have a case study where you can look behind the curtain and see what went wrong, and then look at the regulations and the legislation, the rules, and decide how it can be plugged. So as an example, when an auditor was alert, because all our school systems, charter and our traditional, have audits. When an auditor who's certified accountant on a list with the state controller's office goes to do the audit, they can be let go, fired by the charter school because that auditor was really noticing the red flags and asking questions. And no one would really know about it. A new auditor would come in who's getting paid by that charter school or regular school, and they wanna keep their jobs, so they're sort of glossing over the red flags. And so the recommendations, as an example, on page 30, say that the auditor that is no longer working on the case, they're either were let go or they decided to go, whatever reason, has to notify the state controller and the school as to why they are no longer working on this particular audit. If they're delayed in submitting an audit, that is also a red flag, because in our case, what happened is the auditor would say, there's missing information, and all of a sudden, a bunch of fabricated documents will appear with new dates that are backdated so that they can get the full amount per student, like this child is a commodity to line their pockets. So again, that has to be reported. Also, stricter guidelines as to attendance, because what was happening in our case is the kids would be who weren't even in the charter school, they're just, their name and identities essentially being stolen to be able to garner money for the two leaders of this pyramid organization. The kids would be then moved to another charter school on paper, and now you're getting double pay for the same student, but there's no method by which you can detect those holes. Again, those were the recommendations, which had consensus from everybody, because nobody wants these bad apples, so that you can take that student and have accountability. Another thing was that the auditor doesn't rely on the sample in order to see if there is fraud from the charter school heads or any school head, but rather has to garner a sample from an outside source so that the sample can be verified properly. And including if you have a charter school that is not, more a brick and mortar, but is online, the sampling will include a sample letter to a parent that supposedly is the parent of this child to create a real verification whether that child is in fact enrolled. Because in our case, thousands of kids, their identities were taken from athletic programs in the summer. They were given $25 per student to allegedly help the athletic program and enroll them in this fake charter school, summer charter school, and they were getting $1,700 from the state per student for their $25 investment. So being able to send a sample letter to that parent to say, is your kid actually enrolled in a summer school, was also a way to prevent fraud in the future. So this verification of attendance, independent sources, better training and education, being able to not get fired if you're an honest, on top of it, auditor, all of these things are part of the examples of the common sense but much needed recommendations that this task force made. And I'm very excited to continue to work, and I commit to do that with the controller to make sure that these recommendations are implemented. They have consensus by our wonderful educational system and by our charter school leaders, because again, like I said, no one wants these bad apples in our system, and we want to protect the funding for our kids. I want to introduce our successor receiver, Mr. William Robert Ayers, who was extremely amazing in recovering a lot of this money, which we're so excited goes back into our educational system, and also with the help of two amazing lawyers, Chris Salentino and Vanessa Rodriguez, who helped file all sorts of lawsuits in addition to the criminal restitution amounts that we got to return money to the kids in our system. Mr. Ayers.
Thank you very much. Thanks. My pleasure this morning to spend a few minutes with you regarding the task force and the incredible dedication and effort that each and every member of that task force contributed during the process. I think that no one had a personal agenda, and that's an important aspect. That we all had civil and constructive discussions. A lot of recommendations came forth that were very important to put into the implementation process. And that's maybe the key point here, is that we want to see the recommendations that were brought forward actually implemented. And that's not gonna probably sit well with a lot of folks, but that is what needs to be done. This is, early on in this case, it was pretty well evident that there was some lax accounting standards being practiced. And I think that when that was first discovered, formation of this task force began to come together. And again, so many people, Summer's office, terrific support. As you mentioned, Leon Shore, David Aurelio, our wonderful council, Dinsmore firm, Chris Valentino and Vanessa. I can't thank you all enough for how much this means. Bottom line to me is that this results in improved educational foundation for the kids. That's where it falls out. And we have to make sure that the education dollars that are misappropriated get reapplied, and that doesn't happen again. While you can't prevent all fraud, I think there are so many recommendations in here to alleviate recurrences of this case again, which I would certainly not want to see happen anywhere, especially California, nationwide. So once again, thanks to everybody. I'm honored to be able to recover dollars. I still have a fiduciary responsibility to all you taxpayers. This is public money, and I'm not going to sit still for not recovering your taxpayer dollars. We are continuing negotiations with additional settlements. I see those forthcoming in the very near future. And once again, thanks to everybody, David, council, Kimberly, David, who expertly drove all of the meetings. And everybody, thank you again. It's my honor to represent everybody here. And I'll do my best to make sure that we get those dollars back for you. Thanks. I'd like to
Yep, thank you very much. Okay, thank you. So we have an opportunity for questions, if you have any questions.
I do. Are there any current investigations going on behind this task force?
This case?
Yes,
So
around the
this
state.
case has already been prosecuted, and correct me if I'm wrong, the defendants have been sentenced, right?
Yes.
Has been sentenced. So there are no active litigation cases that she is working on, the district attorney from San Diego is working on. But as a result of going through this case, it became evident that there are other cases throughout the state of California where this level of fraud is continuing to exist and to grow. And so we wanted to make sure that we fully prosecuted the defendants to the fullest extent of the law, and really send a signal out to everyone that is bilking the state of California that when we catch you, we are going to throw the book at you and you are not going to get away with this. So it is our goal to make an example of those fraudsters that steal money from taxpayers.
And for a follow-up question, what was the steps into finding out, these wrongdoings, by these individuals, or was it reported by? Thank you.
Something was wrong, and we started to get information that it's a system we hadn't heard of before, where you pay $25 to an athletic summer program, and they give you the identity and documentation of that student signed off by their parents, and they're registering you into a summer class. It just sounded fishy, and as we began our investigation, started looking at all sorts of tax returns that are public as to the two head people, it seemed really, really, something was not right in our experience. The two top people were getting hundreds of thousands of dollars, but the schools weren't making that amount of money, so it just wasn't matching. So then hundreds of, search warrants later, investigation proceeding, this was an extensive investigation for over a year, 70 witnesses testified at the grand jury, 235-page indictment that documented step by step. The messages, the emails were very probative, emails about, how many kids have you registered? 4,000, well, that's not enough, you should register more kids, as if we're, talking about some kind of commodity. So all of the evidence started to roll in, and we were able to make this massive fraud case.
It's just disgusting when you think about it. It's disgusting how these two men set out to enrich themselves on the backs of our young students. Yes.
Say one thing? So I would say, Gregory McGinnity with the California Charter Schools Association really appreciated the work of the district attorney's office. We had heard from our members, and this was a school that was not a member of our association, and brought this to the attention of the previous state superintendent of public instruction in early 2018. Because we knew, as they did, there's something not right here. And we wanted to make sure that kids were being served and money was not being moved out. And so really glad that the prosecution took place.
You also said that each child was worth, that's a correct way of saying it, about $1,700. And sometimes that one child might be entered in twice, so that would be $3,400. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, question.
Yeah, I'm thinking locally, just recently, St. Home Public Schools had a similar issue, but the district was the one that audited the charter schools and found potential mismanagement, but then renewed their license anyway. I guess I have a two-part question. One, would this replace like a district audit with some sort of frequency or regularity? And then two, schools or charter schools that have already been flagged, are those already on your radar? Are those things already?
So out of the 20 recommendation, there's also a package of pieces of legislation that we're going to be putting together and that we're going to be partnering with the members of the legislature on to introduce. Our goal is to have a statewide approach. Remember, in the beginning of the conversation, I said that it was the charter schools that brought us here, but these rules, these generally accepted accounting principles are guardrails to help shore up that this does not continue to happen, whether we're talking charter school, private school, whether we're talking or public school. So it is our goal to strengthen the reporting rules, the requirements, and also put some additional layers of oversight, i.e. through the members of the legislature, in place so that everyone is on alert, so that this does not continue to happen. Now, specifically to what's happening here in Sacramento County, I don't think any of us are affiliated with that.
No, I just meant like, I'm sure there are multiple charter schools that have been flagged. I use this as an example. One, how frequently will you guys be doing these audits? Because currently there aren't really any guidelines, so just
You're right.
doing them whenever. And then two, are there already flagged schools that you will, that since there are already on our radar throughout the state? Do you know the answer to that?
I do have an answer to that. All the charter schools and the school districts are audited every year by a certified public accountant, and it's a financial and compliance audit, kind of like what was referred to as a single audit. So they are audited every year by a CPA, and then there are additional other oversight. But again, these recommendations are for an overall approach from multiple directions, a more global approach.
Would those multiple directions include like test scores? I'm hearing, some charter schools, they can fudge test scores and then reporting of like sexual and physical abuse?
We're actually following the money. So no, we're not following test scores, but we're following where the money was. The money. It was intended to go someplace, and we followed to see that it was diverted and went someplace else. So double accounting, as you heard, one student being counted twice. You also heard the student's identity being sold, so that their other charter schools' roles would be bolstered, so that they would be getting more money from the state. So that is the extent that we are of our involvement.
I would have to say that from the association's perspective, I don't believe your characterization around the test scores is true. So just like all public schools, charter schools have their children assessed, and all of that data is publicly available on the California Department of Education's website.
All right, one more question.
So, two-parter, just to clarify, these recommendations would be to like bolster the annual oversight, audit process, is that correct?
That's correct.
And then I wanted to ask, is the goal of implementing these auditing practices to flag these issues for charter authorizers so that they may do something about renewal, or for district attorney's offices to prosecute these issues?
So these recommendations are, yes, to flag for charter, authorizers, and oversight entities, but also what we call LEAs. What does LEA stand for?
Local Education Agency.
Local education agencies. So that also incorporates, school districts across the entire state of California.
It was a really thoughtful part of the process that we looked at all public schools, including charter schools, and saying where are the weaknesses to make sure that dollars are going into the classroom and they're actually helping kids and they're not being taken away.
And I would say the primary goal, which was stated, is to prevent fraud from happening. Because once fraud happens, you have to have a DA's office that can devote essentially this many resources to the case, and then really to be successful enough to recover the money. It doesn't usually happen. The money's already spent and out by the time you discover the fraud. So I think while, you know, we welcome more prosecutions and happy to put away people who wanna game the system, but the best win for our kids is to create the systems that will flag the issues early so that you can stop the fraud from happening.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your-
I know, paper crazy.